Welcome to part 12, the final part of the Grammar of Graphics. This is really an informal little discussion about cheat sheets for the Grammar of Graphics in this case, but some of what I'm going to say applies to any of these. So we notice here that up in the top left, it tells us that you can build every graph. These are the basics. You can build every graph from the same components: a data set, a coordinate system, and geomes that are visual marks that represent data points on our graph. And then it talks about, reminds you that you have aesthetics like size, color, and X and Y locations. And then it, after that, comes down here and it says, all you need to do to build a graph is complete this template where you're putting in data, the geome, the aesthetics. But then in light green, notice dark green it says is required. Light green, not required because sensible defaults are supplied. So really it's our tweaking that does anything with the rest of the graphics. Now, one thing that I do want to tell you about a cheat sheet is it's not an owner's manual. It is not the complete documentation. But oftentimes what you can get from this is maybe not everything you need, but enough so you know what to go search for. Okay? So I'll give you some examples of that. All right, let's go ahead and look at this first page because I find this a very useful page for what we do when we're looking at graphs for the kinds of statistics that we often do in the behavioral and social sciences. So this section right here, you're not going to need much. This is just what it calls graphical primitives. That's sort of underlying basic stuff. Notice it'll do polygons, rectangles, curves. So you could really, and I've actually seen some scripts that will like draw a picture of Mount Rushmore or something like that. I'm serious. There's some really artistic stuff being done with ggplot2 and using these graphical primitives. So what we're going to look at is down here. This is where I think it starts getting interesting. This is very much like what I teach my students about how to determine what statistical analysis to do. Start by identifying your response and explanatory variables and identify whether they are categorical or continuous, quantitative. So what it calls here one variable continuous, I would call that one variable quantitative. What you have here now for one variable quantitative is sort of your basic geomes that you would use if you were going to look at a single quantitative variable. And over here, it kind of gives you the picture of what you're shooting for. So if I needed to draw a normal curve, I'd want geome density, which is something you're probably not going to ever have to do. But what you might want to do is draw histograms or dot plots, which are down here, or frequency polygons. Again, this doesn't give us everything that are the defaults and everything that we should be putting in here, but what it will give us is an idea of what the geomes are. So let's suppose that I wanted to know for a histogram, what are some of the things that I can fill in? So if I wanted more details, what I would probably do is I would probably do a web search on, say, geome histogram or geome dot plot, and then you can get full details. But I think there's enough here that I can at least get started. So what does that C mean? Well, look at the very top up here, right under one variable continuous. C means you put in the ggplot and you put in your data and maybe an aesthetic. But notice for an aesthetic, it's only putting in one possible aesthetic here because this is one continuous variable. Does that make sense? So let's try that. Let's try that with our, and look at, it's using the same data set that we used. So let's go ahead and under here, let's take ggplot and put in miles per gallon, put in an aesthetic, and we don't even need to indicate a Y because we're only going to indicate one variable. Put in highway, okay, and then a plus. And so if you look back here on this sheet, we've done this part. And so now we're going to add to C, we're going to add to it, say the histogram. All right, let's see if what will happen if we don't put anything in for the histogram, if we just let it use the defaults. Remember, it said that it often will use reasonable defaults. So this is called geom histogram with an underline. There it is. Okay, let's try that. And there you go. Pretty simple little histogram. And then if we want to fiddle with anything, we can fiddle with it. But that gives us the basics. And again, you can look up online geom histogram if you want more than just the basics. So that was pretty easy. Now this kind of tells us some of the things we can mess with. I don't know what's going to happen if I put in a second variable because it says X and Y. I don't know what alpha is, but I could look those all up online. I can see here color, that I could probably figure out what that does. So that's the basic idea of how to use this. Now let me show you one more thing while we're at it. Suppose you wanted to take that in parts. You can do that. Watch this. So let's say I wanted to say my plot. I can save this just like I can save any kind of object in R. So I'm going to put in the ggplot with that one aesthetic. I'm going to save it in my plot, and then look what I can do. My plot plus geom histogram, and run that. I've made multiple ones of these, okay? So it's still giving us a histogram, but it's telling us that we can probably do a better job. So let me go back to this, and it says it's using bins equals 30. Let's say bins equals 10. Let's put that in. There we go. Okay, and it liked that better. It didn't give me a warning message. Before, it thought that I was using too many bins by using the default. So here it is with only 10 bins. Okay, let's go back here to the cheat sheet and notice that we also have on this sheet up here at the top 2 variables, both of them quantitative. Okay, and then you can see the kinds of pictures you can get. Here we have 2 variables, one categorical, one continuous. No surprise that side-by-side box plots is part of that. But you can also get things that you might want to experiment with, like I showed you in one of the videos, a violin plot or a dot plot. And we can even put them both in, put them both together. And I had done that in one of the videos. Here we have 2 categorical variables, okay, both categoricals. And this sort of gives you the size based upon the count in the category. Up here we have, probably not going to use these much. Let's see, what else do we have? Down here we have 1 discrete variable. Here then using 3 variables. And you also saw that you could use 3 variables by using an aesthetic. Now let's move over to here. Again, the stats, it kind of gives you an overview up in this corner. And again, when you look at these stats, what it might be able to do, stat count probably is going to count. Some of these we're never going to use. We already did use the stat summary down here. And you can also do stat summary putting things in bins. Okay, and it shows you for each of these the most common types of arguments that you might want to set. But again, we can look online and we can see a whole lot more about each of these. So use this as sort of a first stopping point to sort of narrow down what you need to look up and what you need to work with. Now, also on this side of the page, position adjustments are important. Themes are optional, obviously. Facets are given up here, and it tells you about the different types of facet into columns, facet into rows, both rows and columns, wrap it around, create a grid. And then labels, it tells you it will be labels, title, subtitle, caption, and then you can even annotate. That is, you can manually put in some text where you want to put it in. Let me try that. So let me do a annotation on that histogram. So let me have a geom histogram, and then let's use, what was the actual command? It was annotate, put geom equals text, and then I put X and Y where I want it to be. I'm not sure what that label's about, so let's try this. And let's see, it looks like a good place would be to have X at about 35 and maybe Y at about 45. Now, I'm not sure if this is going to work. We're trying this together for the first time. Can't find a geom called my histogram. Okay, so obviously, that error message told me something. I actually have to use a particular type of textual geom. So let's see. The geom to place. This text, that actually is an example of the annotation. So what we have is we have geoms for the annotate layer. And so we can take, and remember annotate's part of the labels layer. So we can put in text here, actually the word text, and then the label is what text we want. So look what I've done over here. I've created this annotate geom text, put it at 35, 45, and call it my histogram, and there it is. And you might think, well, what other things are available besides text? You should look it up. There's some really cool stuff. Like, for instance, you can make a rectangle so that if you have a scatter plot and you want to highlight certain points in the scatter plot, you can annotate with a rectangle and highlight those points in the scatter plot. Pretty cool stuff. Anyway, I hope I've given you a little bit better feel for how to use a cheat sheet. It's not going to necessarily tell you everything you need to know, but it's going to save you a lot of time in terms of your web searches in looking up to get some of the specifics depending on what you want to do. I think taking advantage of these little pictures right next to each of those geoms is going to be very useful to you here to see what it is that you want to do. And of course, we've got the Research Cafe, and you've got me to help you. We've got discussion groups, so feel free to draw on those as needed. All right, happy graphing.